welcome back to Our Walk in Christ. Well, today we're going to do a little bit more of an opinion piece, a little bit less of a solid teaching like we usually do. But if you remember, there's a couple of these bakery court cases going on where a homosexual couple went into a bakery run by a Christian person or a Christian couple and demanded a cake that would violate the concept of marriage by the owners. And so they said, well, we can sell you a cake that's pre-made, but we won't custom make a cake, or we can give a referral to somebody. And this caused court cases. And both of these cases, there's a high profile one in Colorado, a high profile one in Oregon, that both ended up in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court finally came down with a ruling on these, and that is what we're going to talk about today. Before we do that, I'll remind you can help support the channel if you want to pick up the audiobooks that I have. I have now four audiobooks over on Audible right now. You can have a look at the link in the description down below. If you sign up to Audible with my link, that actually they do give me an extra finder's fee for signing up an account. Audible is $14.95 per month. You can cancel at any time. You get 2 audiobooks per month. If you already have an Audible account, I do have 4 books over there. Josiah's Sanctification, Testing and Temptations, I Am Not Amused, and The Art of Shallow Neighboring. And my new book, Happy Holidays, will actually be hitting Audible within the next couple of months. We're just wrapping up the final audio files now, put them through QA. So with that being said, first and foremost, we have to ask this question: do you as a business owner have the right to refuse service? And this is an interesting topic because, I own a little web design company. I also run a publishing company. Do I have the right to refuse service? Well, there's some yeses, there's some nos, and there's some maybes in the middle of this. First and foremost, there is a law that was in 1964, I believe, that was the Federal Civil Rights Act, which prevented anybody from discriminating against race, color, religion, or national origin among places that are called places of public accommodation. So since my businesses are all run out of the home and all electrical communication, I don't fall under this act. So I could technically refuse service to anybody for any reason whatsoever, no questions asked. Would I do that? Probably not. Have I ever asked somebody, what color are you, before doing a website? No, I don't care. And the reality is most of the world really truly doesn't care. Now, some states are starting to add to this sexual orientation. And this is where we find this interesting intersection, because both Colorado and Oregon have sexual orientation clauses added to these, which is how these came up to a court case. And then what ends up happening is the intersection of the freedom of religion, the freedom of speech, and this discrimination ruling. And so basically what the law says is if you have a place of public accommodation, which is a restaurant, a store, a theater, a hotel, anywhere where there's an open door to the public, there's hours, you walk in and you purchase a service, this is what is covered under this Federal Civil Rights Act. Okay, the original act, like I said, prevented discrimination based upon color, race, religion, or national origin. So if a person came in, and you knew because he came in, maybe he was a Jewish man who usually has a hat, right? If they come in and they're wearing a hat, you can't say, well, you're a Jewish person, we don't sell to your kind. That would be against the law. All right. And again, some places are starting to add in sexual orientation protections as well. Now, there are places where you could refuse the service under unilateral that don't have anything to do with it. So you can't say we don't serve people without ties and enforce that on one type of person and not another. So in other words, if you have an upscale restaurant can refuse service to you if you do not have an overcoat on. Okay, they are allowed to do that, but they have to do that only, they have to do that, unilaterally. In other words, it doesn't matter if you're white, black, green, purple, pink with purple polka dots. If you come in, as long as you have a suit coat, they can serve you. If you don't, they can't reject you for any reason other than those mentioned above. Also, things like bars, not only do they have the right to not serve you if you're already intoxicated, it's actually against the law to serve you further if you're already intoxicated. So there are times and places when a person can refuse service. Now, what ended up happening in both of these cases we're looking at is a homosexual couple comes into a bakery owned by a Christian person and orders a wedding cake for a homosexual wedding. This is where we have our problems, because now we have a case where there's nothing on the federal level, but the state level said you're not allowed to discriminate based upon a sexual orientation. All right. And because of this, they said, no, we won't do this, because their definition of a marriage is different than their customer's definition of a marriage. That's really is at the hinge pen. Now, in these cases, the cities, the jurisdictions, the states, whatever, fined the bakers. They all had a lot of problems, and these guys kept appealing it up. And the Oregon one, which actually happened first, finally hit the Supreme Court. And then I looked around at the various news groups, and so New York Times reports it this way: Supreme Court won't rule on the clash between another bakery and a gay couple. In other words, Supreme Court's not listening to this. All right, Washington Post, Supreme Court passes on the case involving a baker. Is that really what happened? No. These two liberal cases, they completely twisted the facts here. If you dig through, there's no link to anything in the Supreme Court, linking at all. The reality is that the Supreme Court did say something about it. This is actually their document. Here's what they did. In the case of this situation, they vacated the judgment. Vacated means, no, you do not have to pay. And then they remanded the case down to the Court of Appeals in Oregon. And the reason they did this is because the Oregon case said, we're not listening to this court case. The Supreme Court vacated the judgment, said, no, you can't do it, and then demanded that the appeals court seize the case anyway. Under what basis? Well, under the basis that the Supreme Court also this week did rule in favor for a baker, to say the baker was in the rights to turn away this homosexual couple. And the reason for this had to do with the fact that, I don't think this article covers it, but had to do with the fact that in the original ruling here, the this was the Colorado case, the Colorado court basically called the person's religion, quote, reprehensible and evil and bad. And the Supreme Court said, I'm sorry, you've just violated his freedom of religion. And so because the freedom of religion was violated, the Supreme Court overturned that ruling and said to Colorado baker, no, you had the full justification on religious grounds to refuse that particular service. All right. Now, the Christian Post actually did get this right. I wanted to get sources other than the Christian Post. I just thought it was interesting that on the same exact ruling, your New York Times and your Washington Post gave us a revisionist history which says, oh no, the Supreme Court's not even listening to this. Incorrect. The Supreme Court vacated the decision and kicked it back down to the appeals court, forcing the appeals court to deal with it on the basis and specifically considering the 2018 case about the Masterpiece Cake Shop in Colorado. That's really what was happening here. And they actually have quotes from it to describe, this is from the Supreme Court, says in their court filing, to describe a man's faith as, quote, one of the most despicable pieces of rhetoric that people can use, end quote, is to disparage his religion in at least two distinct ways. One, by describing it as despicable and also characterizing it as merely rhetorical, something insubstantial, insubstantial and even insincere. That's what the Supreme Court said about the appeals court decision when they overturned it. You can't tell somebody that their faith is reprehensible. And that's really at the hinge pin. So they kicked it back down, citing that case, saying you have to rule on this. Because what we're kind of coming up against right now is this situation where we are dealing with a fundamental Christian term. That fundamental Christian term is called marriage. Marriage is a Christian term, a biblical term. Maybe you just call it a faith-based term, which was classically defined as the union of one male and one female together. All right. Now, what is the stance that the church should have on the greater world and homosexual marriage? Well, the Bible tells us it doesn't care. Okay, now before you call me a heretic, open up your Bible to 1 Corinthians chapter 5. And in verse 9, he says, I wrote you in my letter not to associate with immoral people. I did not mean the immoral people of this world, or the covetous, or the swindlers, or the adulterers. Excuse me, that's idolaters. For then you would have to go out of this world. But I actually wrote to you not to associate with any so-called brother if he is an immoral person, or covetous, or an adulterer, or a reviler, or a drunkard, or a swindler, not even to eat with such one. And this is the key verse, verse 12. What do I have to do with judging outsiders? Do you not judge those who are within the church? But those who are outside, God judges. Remove the wicked man from yourselves. You see, it doesn't matter. As Christians, we don't need to worry about the cultures or the state or the society making homosexuality legal. It's not our concern. The only area we have to be concerned with is what is the stance inside the church. The church specifically calls that a sin in numerous places by both word and actual description. We have to adhere to that. We have to understand that that is what the Bible statement is. But that doesn't apply to the whole rest of the world. That's not us going out and picketing against people. That's nothing out there. The fundamental challenge is that in America, we have the right to express our faith. And if my faith says, I believe in a fundamental interpretation of Christianity that marriage is between one man and one woman, and I happen to bake cakes, I should not be forced to bake a specialized cake for what my faith would call a perversion of marriage. And so this is where, in my opinion, what we need to do, and if anybody out there has any influence in law, I think that this is where we need to do. Number one, 2 points of opinion. Number one, can our society not learn to live in a little bit of peace? Okay, a homosexual couple, they now have the full legal right in this country, countrywide, to marry. I'm not bothered by that. I'm only bothered when the state says they have to do it inside of a Christian church. Because now that violates what the faith of the Christianity is. And to my understanding, I believe that a church, I could be wrong, I think that a church can reject that. That on religious terms. Because also taking note of where we started with the Right to Refuse Service Act, this Civil Liberties Act, nonprofits like churches are actually exempt from it. So, I don't have to, if I'm going into a Christian, coffee shop that's catered inside of a church as part of the church's ministry, they may have the right to do that. Maybe not. That gets on about as hairy ground as all this. But the fact of the matter is, you have your rights. You are perfectly welcome in our society. You have the ability to get married. Fine. Now, can you come to the table with a further concession to say, this bakery is owned by Christian people. They disagree with the lifestyle. Pick a secular one. It's not like there's not other bakeries in town. Now, with that being said, here's the thing I would like to do. If I were a shop owner of like a generic candy store, I'm buying wholesale candy. I'm not necessarily manufacturing anything. I'm certainly not doing anything special or custom. I should absolutely, it should not matter if a person comes in. It should be against the law for me to discriminate against them and not sell them a bag of candy because they happen to be gay. It doesn't matter. Okay. Even if I'm doing just basic, if I'm a confectionery and I'm making candy and somebody wants to come in and get something that I'm hand baking. Maybe they want a special order, 1,000 special chocolates or something with special nuts and caramels. I don't see a problem with that. But what we need is a provision in the law that any term or any service that traditionally has been rendered to a Christian entity needs to have a religious exemption. And perhaps those store owners might need to post that somewhere. In other words, since we talked about marriage, and marriage is fundamentally a faith-based concept, and traditional interpretations of Christianity have said this is a marriage is between one male and one female. Okay, a person who is a Christian running a private company should have an exception legally to say, I can't do that particular cake in that particular case because it basically would mean a violation of how my faith interprets marriage. Okay, we need to carve out for that. It can't be just for anything and everything, but it would have to be for terms that are specifically related. So anything dealing with a wedding is the best example. A Christian photographer shouldn't be forced to take pictures at a gay wedding. A Christian baker shouldn't be forced to do that because there's other places that the people can go to if they want to. All right. Is that to say they're bad and nasty and evil and we got to judge them or whatever else? No, that's not the heart. The heart of the matter is we are in a pluralistic society. You guys want a pluralistic society. Now live by your pluralistic society. Okay. Because in our pluralistic society, I have a faith and I'm trying not to violate that faith. And my faith says marriage is between a male and a female. If you want to come in and purchase, basically engage in a service that would violate my definition based on my traditional interpretation of faith, I should be able to do that and suffer the consequence of loss of business if my town doesn't find that. Okay, and I'd be, hey, it's okay if you say, hey, we are a faith-based bakery, so, you can't come in here and get a custom-made cake for the gay wedding in this case. That's all I'm saying. We need to have anything related to a service rendered to anything dealing with a faith-based service. We need to have a freedom of religion exemption from that. Okay. Now, and as somebody that's just wrote in my comments here, this is a very true statement that I did not actually mention. I don't think I did anyway. But yeah, the bakers did not have any problem with selling this couple a cake that was already built and on the shelf. Their only quibble was, we're not going to custom make you one. So they weren't actually denying service. They were just saying we can't violate our conscience by doing this. That's kind of my opinion piece. Let me know, do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below. Please keep it civil because obviously this is a difficult situation for sure. But the reality is we have to learn how to live as a society, understanding that some of us do not necessarily agree with your lifestyle. Okay, and that's okay. You don't disagree with my lifestyle. Can we have a common ground and not talk about sexuality in the public square? Maybe there's a better option. But that being said, yeah, if a service is traditionally related to a faith, then I think that we should have a religious exception clause for those types of services, which would cover your bakers, your photographers, services rendered in those situations. But anyway, let me know what you think in the comments down below.